Hello, I'm Andrew Peters. I'm the sales support engineer over here at Visionics. What I'm going to be showing you today is how to build up a 3D scene using Genesis AM and Genesis RTX. First thing you'll see is I'm going to be at the island of Oahu. Right now it's currently being represented by a very generic texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding in some imagery and some elevation data to my scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those GIS files, JPEG 2000 for my elevation data and an ECW file for my imagery. Drag it into our Genesis AM tool, save my tool, and hit Shift F5 to refresh my database. And you see almost instantaneously we put in 10-meter imagery and 250-meter elevation data for the island of Oahu and some of the surrounding areas. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a higher resolution inset for the actual island of Oahu itself. So I'm going to take this 1-foot ECW file. It is not a tiled ECW file. It's one single file that represents the entire island. It is reprojected into geodetic WGS 84 projection. And I'm also going to drag in a bunch of DTED files into Genesis AM. So I'm going to grab their directories and drag it into my elevation data section. So you can see here it added in these 5 DTED files. So next thing I'm going to do is just hit refresh in Genesis RTX. And you'll see very rapidly it's adding in 1-foot imagery, and it's also re-adding in all the previous elevation data and also the new 90-meter and 30-meter resolution elevation data. And so again, it's for the entire island, and there were not tiled files at all. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding in some cultural data for the city of Honolulu. So as you can see, all we did so far is for imagery and elevation data. We just told Genesis AM where your files were located, and we're able to build up a 3D scene by itself. So the next thing I did was I just took my shape file for my building footprints, and I just dragged it into my vector data section. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new attribute evaluator. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it generic buildings. And then I'm going to tell Genesis AM to look for any shapefile that has the word buildings in it to be used inside this attribute evaluator. And then I'm going to create a rule that says I'm going to work on every single record inside this shapefile. So I'm going to make it be a pass-through. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new assembler chain. And what that assembler chain will be is publish polygon to extruded geometry. And what this tells us to be able to do is take a polygon footprint and extrude 3D geometry out of that footprint. What you can see when you open up a publisher is that you have over here on the left are attribute fields that we would expect out of that shapefile. And what over here is on the right are the attribute fields that actually you have inside your shapefile, or you can actually map hard-coded values. So if you had an attribute field called elevation that represented the height of your buildings, you could then type in elevation, and we would then look for an attribute field called elevation and map it to what we would expect to be height. The shapefile I just put in there already has a height attribute field in there, so I want to make sure that it just gets mapped to the correct one. So that's all I need to be able to do to add in some buildings. So again, I'm going to hit Shift F5 on my keyboard. And within a few seconds, you'll start seeing 3D buildings start appearing in the scene. And what we've just done was added in 186,000 generic buildings to the scene. So this is for the entire area, downtown Honolulu and some of the surrounding areas. Again, these are not pre-rendered models. These are not hand-modeled open flight models. These are just generic buildings that are generated from a building footprint file, and a generic texture is being applied to the side of them. So that's all you need to be able to do to give yourself some geotypical cultural fill. Next thing I want to show you is how to put in some open flight models into your scene to kind of give it a more geospecific look to it. So I'm going to add in the terminal building of Hickam Airfield as well as some of the surrounding hangars. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my features area, which is where I store all my open flight models, drag the shapefile into the vector data section, and then create another new evaluator, and I'm going to call it open flight models. Tell it to look for every single open flight model that has the word feature in it. Work on every single record inside the shapefile, and then I'm going to publish it. For this one, since it is a point shapefile, I'm going to select Publish Point to Model. And then the next thing I need to be able to tell Genesis is where do my open flight models live? First thing you see here is an attribute field called Feature. Our shapefile already has an attribute field called Feature in it. And what it tells you is where the name of the open flight, what the name of the open flight model that you want to place in it. It also has a heading attribute field called HDG. So for feature, I don't have to do anything with it. It'll already automatically map to the attribute field called feature. But the next thing I want to do is tell it where that open flight model is located. What I'm going to do is tell it in relative to where the shapefile is located. It's going to be located in my flight folder / day folder. So I'm going to go back one directory into my flight, into my day. And these are all my open flight models that are being placed. And then I'm going to go down here. And as you remember, heading was actually represented by the word HDG. Also, when this shapefile was created, the heading was expected to be done counterclockwise. Genesis RTX now expects it to be done clockwise. So I negate the heading value, and then I also map it to the word HDG. So what this is telling me is that it's going to actually map to the attribute field, HDG, and actually negate it. So I'm going to save it and refresh my project again. And you can see it placed the open flight models right around the airfield. So it placed a couple hangars and the terminal building itself. And then as you can see, it rebuilt all the rest of my previous data. So all 186,000 buildings, the 1-foot imagery, the elevation data, and everything else that we've already placed into the scene. So thank you very much for your time. Please visit our website, www.dimevisionics.com, for more information. Thank you.